So I know I sent a precursor text just to give a heads up because I had a lot of stuff that I just randomly dropped into the notes that I didn't want to make it think it was going to be an overly detailed session on those articles that I had in mind. So I'll obviously will include links to the things in general that prompted some thoughts, but excuse me. There were three different articles that I stumbled across for various reasons that kind of prompted an idea of what integrity actually is. And that's more what I want to focus on. But I do think it's kind of worth at least giving a very high level thought of what the articles were that prompted my thought process. And there's really, I may leave out the third, but there are two primary ones that really made me think about it from two different perspectives. Actually, all three of these were from The Atlantic, weren't they? Now that I look at it.
Yeah, they are. That's really, a great, I gotta say it's a great publication.
I have gotten to where I truly appreciate the level of detail and research and everything gone into, or that goes into each of their articles. I really do. I cannot speak highly enough about them.
You know, I got to really enjoy The Atlantic during 2020. Especially, I think one of the things that really sealed it for me was I hypothesized something, and somebody with a decent science background, said no, that doesn't seem like a legitimate idea. And then I read a fucking article in The Atlantic that basically said exactly what I said. Of course, they said it in a much better way, with much better backup, but it was nice to read that somebody else, somebody else had the same idea that I did.
I'm not sure when I first latched onto The Atlantic as a source that I appreciated. I know it was during the 2020 to 2021 time frame in general, and I've only grown more appreciative of their reporting, and even their opinion pieces actually are so reasonable and well thought out, and even supported with why I have the opinion, which is that last piece is really what is missing from a lot of opinion pieces. And that's what I appreciate most, that even in something that is very clearly opinion and analysis, it's still, I'm going to support my opinion, which is what if you were truly taught critical thinking or analysis in school at any level, was a key component of what makes a good analytical piece, is providing support for why you have this particular viewpoint. And so that's something that I really latched onto and appreciate. With that said, the two primary articles that I stumbled across, the headlines were, one, How We Got Democracy Dies in Darkness, which is a reference to the Washington Post's I'm going to call it a tagline / mission statement because of how it's used. We'll come back to some of the details as to why that would be in just a moment. The other one was a article specifically referencing the kind of the difficulties that faced General Milley during his 6 or so-ish months as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So the article headline was The Patriot. I think there was a sub-tagline, depending on how you found the link. But it was a profile of the general. The third one I mentioned because of its proximity to the most recent one, which is that there was a follow-up about Trump floating the idea of executing Joint Chiefs Chairman Milley after the profile piece went up. I felt that somewhat important to call out just because of its proximity and what triggered it. And I think you'll get a feel for why as I pull a couple of quotes out of the articles just to kind of really emphasize where this idea of integrity as a thought experiment came from. Um, so with the first one, the Washington Post focused article, it was interesting that I did not remember the Super Bowl ad at all, or honestly, when the uh, uh, mission statement was applied. Uh, but the article talks about the timeline and how it was seen as a response to uh, Trump being elected, when in reality it had already been an ongoing process for a couple of years prior. But that didn't stop the former administration from really latching onto and branding the Washington Post as an enemy. Um, but the first piece that really jumped out at me, one was a quote from the Super Bowl ad where Tom Hanks was doing the narration. And the quote was, "There's someone to gather the facts, to bring you the story, no matter the cost, because knowing empowers us. Knowing helps us decide." End quote. And having something that basic for an explanation of purpose and mission, that really there's no bias in that statement at all. And that is very much the epitome of what you would expect a journalistic endeavor to be. I appreciate that, but I don't understand how that created ire or wrath from a certain group of people, other than the fact that they had to attempt to discredit that mission statement. That particular quote isn't what made me think about the integrity piece specifically. It wasn't until I read further into the article and it was talking about how less than a month into his presidency, Trump had denounced the press as the enemy of the American people and really focused on that particular rhetoric, that it kind of clicked about what the Wall Street Journal was another one that was referenced in the article, what the Washington Post was doing. And further reading into the article talked about after Jeff Bezos purchased the Post, he really wanted to emphasize the historical fact-gathering journalistic nature of the organization and make sure it stood by that mission statement. In his words, it was not a paper I want to subscribe to, but an idea I want to belong to. The idea being that we love this country, so we hold it accountable. And I'm going to pause for a moment there because I never really read much about Bezos. I always just kind of assumed he was relatively normal with regard to the way billionaires conduct themselves, I guess is what I'm kind of reaching for.
Yeah.
This particular profile paints him in a different picture than I had mentally, and it makes me curious to learn more about him and his dealings, to see if this was a kind of one-off with the focus on the nature of the Post being what it was originally and not wanting to interfere, or if it's actually more of a profile of the person behind the scenes as well. But not to digress too much, but I do want to emphasize that does make me question some of my mental assumptions prior to this.
Well, anytime that you see, and this is almost always now, or almost every institution now, that is, when you see a company owning a news outlet, you expect them to never report on that company or its subsidiaries or its friends. You don't very simply put not throwing a stone in a glass house. And so that's kind of, I feel like that's the direction that the majority of news media have taken. But it's not, that isn't to say that they are not trying. It's just, I think, more difficult than it was prior to our lifetime.
And in follow up to that, I do want to mention that the Post has reported on a number of things with Amazon specifically that are not particularly flattering. Now, whether they sugarcoated it at all or tried to make it less antagonistic. I don't know. It's not like I've read in detail. Um, but I did do a couple of quick searches just to kind of see did they avoid discussing Bezos outside of uh, his ownership of the Post, and they did not. So credit to them for at least not doing what I would have expected. Now, whether they took it to the full extent of a purely journalistic approach and really reported the facts, I am not in a position to say with regard to Bezos or Amazon. But I would say in other stories that I've read, I have not had to take away that there was a dilution of or bending of the facts most of the time. There are always going to be outliers, but for the most part, they've been a fairly steady voice. And so this article made me start thinking about integrity in endeavors in general. So in this case, obviously work, right? But integrity in action. The other article talking about General Milley really had me start thinking about integrity as a core component of the self and how that drives action. And I make the distinction because I didn't think about it in that order. I thought about it from the action perspective first, and then, well, which one drives which? Does the action component drive that sense of integrity from the individual, or is that innate sense of integrity actually what drives the action response? And not to go into too many details on this particular article either, because it will very easily and quickly turn into, I think, more of a rant if I do. But the gist of the article was that in the waning days of the Trump presidency, there were very clear and obvious signs of derangement and desire to abuse power and misuse military assets. And in fairness, the article does mention that it was not confined to the waning days of the administration. I'm focusing it more on that because that was General Milley's tenure as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But the fact that there were people in places sworn to uphold the Constitution that had to face the question of whether upholding the Constitution meant thwarting the commander-in-chief because of their attacks against the Constitution is very problematic and very interesting from this perspective of integrity and continuing to fight for that thing that you swore to uphold as opposed to buckling under pressure. And I do find that to be an interesting kind of thought experiment and discussion in and of itself. But in the broader scope of things, that's when I started questioning really is integrity an action? You know, in the case of, we'll just use for this particular one, upholding the oath that you swore to the Constitution, or is it an inherent, not inherent, let's try that again. Not innate, but an inherent portion of or component of a person's perspective and ideological views that drives that action. And that's really kind of what I wanted to bring as a topic. I know it's a really long intro, but I thought it was important to have the background for what spurred the thoughts before getting to any discussion on what really is, or do we even mean by integrity?
Well, I was just thinking the movie that I watched this weekend, The Count of Monte Cristo. Spoiler alert here for the next couple of minutes. But the Count of Monte Cristo is seeking revenge on I'm bad with the names. I think it was his old friend Mondego. Is it Mondego? Ed,
It sounds right. I mean, it's been a while since I've watched the movie. I actually thought about it. I never read the book, and I want to go back and read the book and then watch the movie.
I actually would like to go read the book as well. I have not read the book. Um, I do know that there are some differences, but I don't even remember what they are. Um, I went to IMDb real quick to see if it would help me out, and it is not. We just have the first names Edmond. I think it's Edmond Mondego and Fernand Dantes. I think those are the names. Um, or Fernand Mondego and Edmond Dantes. That's it. That's it. I did get some help. Anyway, Edmond Dantes is the Count of Monte Cristo, and he's seeking revenge on his former friend Fernand Mondego for ruining his a significant part of his life. And through the course of the movie, you find out that Mondego's son Albert is actually Edmond's son, and you sort of see the inherent integrity in Albert that is nowhere to be found in Fernand. And so that made you bringing that up made me think of that. It was very timely.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how much that is an integral part to, well, I say it's an integral part to Dumas' writings, but I actually don't know anything about stories that he may have written other than The Count of Monte Cristo and The Three Musketeers. But obviously, The Three Musketeers was or has a very heavily focused storyline about maintaining that integrity to swearing to protect the king and continuing to do so even with the disbandment of the Musketeers. And I think it's interesting how much, if you even take a step back and think about how much literature as a whole dedicates to the concepts of integrity and loyalty both. I mean, it's tough to not see those themes play out in most stories. And I think that's actually indicative of how much weight we place on those traits without even realizing it. Like it's just a natural thing to focus on without meaning to.
I think this this hot take will come at no surprise, but I think it's because those are difficult traits to uphold or maintain or to bring out within oneself, and everything around you, or so much around you, wants to prevent you from doing that, or wants to drag you away from exhibiting those traits. It's not easy. Those traits are often not rewarded, not in not in the ways that we talk about them in lofty ways, but the world around you simply does not reward those. Not
I'd
the way
agree.
that we should.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt because I wasn't sure if you were, if you had something very specific you were trying to kind of craft a statement around. But the thing that kept coming to mind was that more often than not, maintaining integrity creates some level of sacrifice by the person who chooses integrity over wavering on that particular philosophy or goal or ideal.
Yeah, we'll always. Yeah, I agree. We will always revere it, but it will, practically speaking, it will most often be punished, or maybe not. Maybe punished is the wrong word, but it will. It's rarely rewarded.
Yes, it is. It is something where we seek this ideal as long as it aligns with our own values or ideals. And then when someone has a point of pride's the wrong word, but a point of unwavering allegiance to a specific idea or ideal, that for them is a point of maintaining integrity to self, if it doesn't align with the people around them, it more often than not costs the relationship with the people around them. And there are very few other things that trigger that stronger response. Like you could look at um, something like what you find joy in as opposed to what you find boring, and it's not going to trigger as a strong a reaction as what you hold as a life guiding principle. And it shouldn't. I'm not trying to say they're comparable, but it's holding on to or maintaining a uh, point of integrity and belief is often centered around this strongest set of outlooks on something that triggers the strongest response in return. That's maybe a better way to summarize it.
Yeah, I can go back to an example that I thought of, and something I was actively thought while watching a program, narrative or and I'll try not to give any spoilers here since it's not too old of a program, but the the story was there were some victims of sexual assault, and it made its way up to the top of management, and management just they tried to hide it. They tried to destroy the evidence and hide that it ever happened. And because the thought that I had when I saw that was, yeah, because if they actually tried to do the right thing, they would be punished for it. It's like if you try to say, hey, we had this person in the company, they some employees under his leadership, filed these complaints, and it was, several of them, and we did an investigation, and we found him to be guilty, and we involved, law enforcement, and that leaks to the media will, catch wind of it, and people are like, well, I don't want to support that. It's like when they're doing the right thing, it's like it's hard to please everybody all the time, but try, these, the management that think this should not be happening are hiding it because they know that they're going to get punished for it. And there's really no good, at the end of the day, like if that comes out, their stock's going to take a hit. Their, the patronage of their services might take a hit because that, the idea is like that shouldn't happen. And I do, maybe the thing is like, yeah, maybe he had too much, that person had too much power and that should not have happened. But trying to right the wrong is often a punishable offense.
And I think it goes a step further too. It's a lot easier to see problems with the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah.
In the moment, we tend to forget how difficult intentions are to assess until we see it through the clarity of, I know the intention.
Except for things like the Catholic Church and Boy Scouts of America.
Yeah,
there's some things.
There are
some
always
things
exceptions.
It's just like there's some things like there. No, that was always an obvious bad idea from the beginning. So, integrity.
I was going back to. I actually want to go back and pull in the Boy Scouts reference. We can argue that it was always a bad idea because of the benefit of hindsight. If you think about what it's trying to promote, and the reason I'm picking on Scouts is because I know you have an affinity for them based on interactions as well. But if you think about what it was trying to promote about the enjoyment of the outdoors and developing these particular skills, etc., the problem wasn't on the idea. The problem was an execution, which is a running theme, honestly, which you could apply to the church as well.
Yeah, and I did not mean that the idea of the Boy Scouts and the idea of the church was the problem. It's just, it's a really bad idea to execute something in such a way where it's not hard for somebody who is not well to be alone with children.
Yes, the proper safeguards have not been in place in general to protect those engaging in scouting as an activity, for a good example. Um, and I wanted to make sure we clarified that to a point because I think it's a very important distinction, but also because the execution component is so critical to going back to the integrity idea as well. And it's kind of fascinating how those thoughts and ideas easily feed off of each other, because if you have only people who adhere to these principles of integrity, execution becomes less critical. But because we're talking about differences of opinion or what it means to be um, virtuous with regards to integrity, is maybe a convoluted way of saying it, but I think it's a more apt way of describing it. Execution becomes paramount to ensure integrity by those who participate in the activities. And the same can be said for those who pursue journalism, to go back to the Washington Post article, or those who serve in the military at the highest echelons of rank, because it requires that type of mindset, or that type of mentality, that set of virtues to pursue the right thing, or from the journalistic perspective, the facts, without having to uh, rely on purely an individual's perception or philosophy, because there is a vetting process to get those people into those positions. So, in other words, the execution of those people being in those positions was governed in such a way as to make sure that people who found themselves in those positions exhibited those ideals that were what we would call exhibiting integrity, or maintaining integrity. No, it's really actually a difficult subject to talk about beyond
It
that
kind of
in
it
a lot of
is. It
ways.
is. It is.
When I was putting together the notes, I was thinking about all sorts of different tie-ins with just behavior and general psychological state, but none of those truly fit as a conversation topic either, because it's either you are this type of person and you find yourself going through advancement in your path to whatever the next thing is, right? Like whether it's civilian or military or whatever, it doesn't matter. The um, exhibiting these ideals over and over and over advance your goals toward those ideals, right? Um, so the whether it's career advancement or personal advancement or just maintaining, that philosophy or perspective, any of those things could be considered successful, and all of those things are predicated on either an individual being predisposed to a strong adherence to an idea or philosophy or principle, and therefore maintaining that level of integrity with regards to that idea or principle, or oversight that creates proper execution of assigning individuals who maintain that level of adherence to an ideal for purposes of what a job or position entails. Right? So it's either a very strong individualistic leaning or a very structured oversight or executive level implementation.
I think that if you were to be able to quantify how inherent integrity is in a person, and look at the population, I think, like most things, you'll see a bell curve, and that's not and that's not distinguishing between what you're born with, what nature has given you, versus what you're taught, and that's not separating nature from nurture. I think just in general, because you can't. But I think in general, you'd see this bell curve. Like there's going to be some people that just cannot muster any integrity whatsoever. They may not be physically able to in the bodies that they occupy. And there are some people that can't not. And I think, that's a very small group of people. And I think most of us, we're somewhere on the spectrum of, for some people it's easier, for some people it's not. And I think you'd see a bell curve on that. And who knows where, if there's a shift in the bell curve to one side or the other. But what I do know is that if you talk about integrity and if integrity is rewarded, I think that we would move towards that. Or, I think it would make it easier. But I can remember one time not seeing, my son's hurt, one son hurt the other. And I didn't see what happened. And I remember, because I just didn't want to deal with the bullshit, I remember looking at the one that I suspected hurt the other, and I said to him, I was like, I'm going to ask you a question, and everything in you is going to tell you to tell me a lie if the truth is going to get you in trouble. I said, I want you to resist that feeling and tell me the truth, because the lie is often found out. People don't like being lied to. That will often get you into more trouble than the initial infraction. And so I asked him, did you push your brother into the wall? And he said, yes, I did. I said, thank you for being brave and telling me the truth. I was like, we'll deal with this later, but I do appreciate your honesty here. And I know that's a difficult thing, because I can remember wanting to save my skin. And I think that as parents, we should, or in general as people, recognize that, there is a defense mechanism within all of us that fights the inherent integrity that we may have. And it's a survival mechanism. I think I said that twice.
Yeah, so interestingly, I've had a similar conversation not too long ago, but it wasn't focused on like the outcomes of an action. It was more just the generic discussion about, look, I might be upset with a decision. I might not like it. I might disapprove of it. The one thing that I can always say is I will be far more accepting of the ensuing conversation and figuring out an appropriate punishment if you're honest than if you attempt to lie about it and then I find out you attempted to lie about it. The punishment will always be worse in the latter scenario.
It just delays the inevitable.
Right. And it's more, what's interesting is that it's not even that the punishment needs to be more severe. It's that you're trying to get to a point where there's the honest and transparent communication, because that means you can be honest and transparent in return.
Well, I think often the things, it's like, did you brush your teeth? Yes. And the lie was that you brushed your teeth. Like, you're not going to really, like for me, it's like, you're not going to get in that much trouble for not brushing your teeth. You're just probably going to go have to brush your teeth again. But when you lie, then yeah, you do get in trouble. Like there's going to be a significant punishment there. And then trust is broken. Like this happened sometime this year. And, we had a long, I was like, first of all, like going back and brushing your teeth is going to take you less than 5-ish minutes. And I'm definitely going to talk to you about why honesty is important, how trust is broken, and that's going to be at least 15 minutes me talking to you, and then there's going to be a punishment on top of that. You thought that was the punishment, but no, there's more. That's not the punishment. That's how we get to talking about why you're getting punished. And so, it's that's I think that's a really good example of like, the lie is far punished far more than the actual infraction.
It is kind of funny to think about how visceral the response can be to being lied to as well, just outside of the scope of even parenting. Just the realization that you were lied to and how strong the emotional reaction is to that, And then thinking about it from a parenting perspective of trying to keep that emotional response in check to actually be able to respond to the situation relatively appropriately without just really going over the top.
Yeah, but then there's a case where there's a documentary on Netflix about Alex Murdaugh, and it's quite an interesting documentary. If you've got some time, and you like true crime, then I'd recommend it for that. But yeah, this guy he was on trial for murdering his son and his wife, and he lied about being there. And the investigators, they got into the son's phone. His voice is in a video. You don't actually see him, but his voice is on a video, and he's been identified by people that know him. And so it's like he said he wasn't there. He said, he arrived like 20, 30 minutes after that video would have been recorded. He didn't know about the video. And he lied about it. He lied about being there. And when he got caught in his lie, sitting in a courtroom, he was asked, why do we lie? He never answered the question. He just said, I think his response was, the web that we weave. And it was just like, he was even asked about, what did you mean by that? And he said, well, I said one lie, and I just had to keep lying to support that lie. So, but he never answered the initial question, why did they lie? But I think it was pretty obvious, and that is that he murdered his son and his wife. And I think in a case like that, I guess you have no integrity when you're committing that kind of crime, and the lie really isn't going to make things worse because he received 2 consecutive life sentences in prison. So I'm just arguing the other side of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's
at
not
that
really
point, at that point,
comparison though, because
well, I was just going to say at that point, there's not a, you don't have, when you're being tried for the murder of your son and wife, there's really no integrity left to have.
Yeah, I mean,
at the end of the day, nobody fucking cared about the lie.
Yeah, for all right, so this is where it's kind of interesting because yes, there are flaws in the criminal justice system for sure. But for someone to be indicted and charged with murder of family members, there has to be some level of evidence that attempts to support the narrative, right? That it can't be completely frivolous. And I begrudgingly say that because there have been plenty of cases where the wrong person has been accused of murder and their alibi had some question to it, and it wasn't until later, like DNA evidence exonerated them, or maybe they weren't exonerated, but there's a lot of question about the validity of the evidence. So there's a lot of question marks there, even with that statement. But kind of to boil it all down to a summary statement, you're not going to get to the point where you're charged with 2 counts of murder without something being fishy.
Yeah.
And at that point, if you're caught in a lie, it tarnishes everything. Like there is no coming back from that. Either you're telling the truth or you're caught in a lie, and then everything you say is completely suspect.
Well, yes. I think that is a true statement. I think in this particular case, it was pretty, there was a lot of the evidence was circumstantial. But, they had, just a few solid pieces of evidence that led to a conviction. I don't think that the jury I don't think they took too long to deliberate, in this particular case. And I share some of the details just for some background, and that, the son that was murdered a few years prior was in a boating accident, and this boating accident, somebody lost their lives, and this boating accident could have been completely avoided, and it was a result of I don't know what South Carolina calls it, but most places driving while intoxicated. If this guy had if the the boy operating the boat had not been intoxicated, this probably would have never happened. And there are some, there's a whole bunch of like, if I had done this, this person would be alive. And so the this boat crash, which seems to be totally unrelated to this murder case, other than the driver of the boat was murdered, set off a cascade of events that led to his murder, and that was that the authorities started investigating why is what was going on. This was a regular occurrence. I mean, even to the point of like right before like the weekend before his death, or like a very short period of time before his murder, the same driver of the boat was doing the same thing. He was driving his boat while intoxicated, and it's like, that sounds terrible. But then they start digging, and they find that his father is like third or fourth generation prosecuting lawyer in the county, and it's like everybody in his family basically have been able to just get things cleaned up. Something bad happened, things got swept under the rug, and they started investigating him, and they find out like he's embezzling from the law firm that he's a part of, his family law firm. He is he's got a serious drug issue. He's trafficking to the point where, like, at one point, he had his, I think, distant cousin over the course of, I don't know, some amount of years, cash over 400 checks that amounted to over about $2.5 million. So this guy was dirty already, and the investigation led to the point where he tried to create. He tried to distract the investigation on him by murdering his son and his wife, saying that somebody came after them.
So it's not funny, but it is funny. That the one thing that just continually pops into my mind is the true crime meme about he was so loving and so normal, dun dun dun, until he wasn't. And it's a trope because it's so commonplace, right? There's a there's an act, there's a veneer from the outside that, as long as it's maintained, you might question a little bit, but there's not a hole, there's not a crack, and all it takes is one crack in that veneer for it to start falling apart and unraveling.
Yeah, the whole thing starts to come down. I think the documentary is on Netflix, and it's called Murdaugh. They say Murdaugh, that's how they pronounce her name, but it's Murdaugh, and it's called, I think it's Murdaugh Murders: A Southern Scandal, because all of this occurred in South Carolina. And I'll say the convicted murderer looks like a coworker that we've worked with.
I immediately have one name and one name only that comes to mind. I'm gonna have to look this up and see. I think that pretty much closes out anything I had on integrity. So maybe to kind of put a little bit of a bow on the conversation, one of the things that did come to mind just with all of the different pieces or components, there have been two primary points in my life where I felt like my choices or philosophies have been challenged in a way that would challenge my integrity with regard to adhering to those thoughts. And both times I have emphasized doing what I thought to be the right thing, which meant, in one instance, leaving employment without any kind of safety net, and in one instance, severing ties with certain people. I don't know that I would consider it a test of integrity, more so than a test of character, whether I would choose to adhere to what I truly believe to be the right thing to do or not. But I'd like to think, as a result of those choices, that I would continue to make the same choices over time. The interesting thing about this, just from a conceptual perspective and what prompted the desire to just talk through it, is that can change so easily depending on the situation and the relationship, right? It's, would I sacrifice the same way if it were my spouse and I? I'm not so sure I could. But at the same time, my spouse and I aren't going to have that kind of rift either, right? Like for us to develop something that we didn't see eye to eye on, or at least didn't have some compatible thoughts or feelings about, and not have that materialize over a decade plus, it would be really strange for that to suddenly be a sticking point, right? There would be a huge change in behavior for that to be a thing. But that is an interesting thought experiment. Would I still hold to the same decisions I've made in the past if it were challenged by my significant other? And I'm just going to leave that as a hanging kind of thought experiment piece, because I honestly don't know how I would answer that question.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.